Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled Arrangement. Arrangement is the archival task of exposing or imposing usable order onto archival materials. This pertains to archival collections in particular. Now, there are two guiding principles about arrangement. The first is provenance, the second is original order. Provenance is the archival principle that tells us to group collections according to their creator. The SAA glossary says that provenance, or respect de fond, requires that, quote, records of different origins be kept separate to preserve their context, unquote. Besides grouping by creator, what other groupings might there be? The most typical is by subject, a principle that comes from librarianship. Think about it. When you pull a book from the library shelves, is it listed by author? Dewey Decimal does list fiction by author's last name, but nonfiction is usually arranged by subject. That is, the Dewey Decimal System or the Library of Congress subject heading system. And that's fine as far as it goes. Archivists at the French National Archives had collected the records of the French département beginning in 1789 and had tried to arrange them by subject. By the 1830s, neither their users nor they themselves could find records any longer, and the archivists realized that the most natural, sensible order was to keep all the records of a single département together, regardless of their subject. Thus came provenance or respect de fond. What does this mean for arrangement within a particular collection? Provenance not only tells the repository to keep records from one creator together, but to arrange the records within any particular collection by subunits of that collection, usually called series. Until recently, archivists were very concerned with the organizational chart of the entity that created the records and arranged, for example, the director's office records in one series, the finance office records in another series, the legal office records in a third series, and so forth. Functional analysis theory impinges on this, but the function did not create the records. The functionary did. But provenance is not the only principle that affects arrangement of a collection. The other is original order. This idea seems simple enough. When an archives receives records, it should not rearrange the file order that the record's creator used. Here's a bit of history. Those same French archivists who articulated the principle of provenance also looked inside their collections and articulated the principle of respect pour l'ordre primitif, respect for original order. Later, when government records became fodder for the historian's mill, archivists looked at the most efficient and effective state office they knew of, which was the Reichskommissariat of Prussia. This office kept meticulous records on all incoming and outgoing correspondence, as well as copies of all letters, in a filing system that would make the worst OCD sufferer think they had died and gone to heaven. Citing that ideal, the Dutch archivists who wrote the first archival manual in 1898 articulated the principle of original order. But the ideal and the reality are often quite different. So let's look at a more holistic set of theories about arrangement. Oliver Wendell Holmes, not the jurist but the archivist, wrote in an article about 5 levels of arrangement. He also wrote about these 5 levels being the gateway to description. And that's true of arrangement. It opens the collection to being described. The first 3 of these levels are intellectual levels. They're conceptual levels. The last 2 are physical levels. They reflect the hierarchical order of information from general to specific within a particular collection. So imagine a pyramid like you see here. At the very top, level 1 is the repository. This is the most general category. There are few repositories and they all hold many collections of archival material. The second level is the collection or record group level, and that's along with subgroups. There are more collections than repositories, but each one is more specific than the repository level. Level 3 is the series and subseries level. Series is the most important component in the arrangement schema and in arranging and processing individual collections. A series is an organic component of a collection and is often earmarked by a distinct filing system. Let your series emerge from natural breaks in the collection or from entities in an organization or from the documenting of functions. Avoid being overwhelmed by genre-based series. For example, do not automatically separate files from photographs, as both genres might document parts of one function or one activity or one entity. The Wiregrass Archives acquires the records of a community theater, for example. At one point in that community theater's history, it documented each play with a file of records and photographs. But in this collection, there were a bunch of photographs of plays that were not filed with the play they documented. So what is the original order? We simply called the theater, and the executive director told us the intent was to file the photos with the files, but they had gotten far, far, far behind on doing that. Then they turned the collection over to us, and we took it upon ourselves to follow that original order as we discovered it from the executive director. Now, a series can be large or small, even as small as a single item, but beware of the tendency to make a collection too granular, especially when there's no apparent original order, so you end up having to impose order. What I'm saying here is, until you get used to dealing with series when you arrange a collection, you are very likely to try to divide things into too many series, too small a series. They document an entity within the collection, they document a function within the collection, they document a functionary in the collection, they document an activity within the collection. They don't have to be tiny. This is a problem in processing. Think of the series a little bit like you'd think of a chapter in a book. Level 4 is the container level. The container component is a change from intellectual to physical arrangement. There are more folders or boxes than there are series, generally speaking, and they are more specific than series. Ask what folders go with which series and arrange them that way. Remember that series can be demarked by changing in file systems. That is, some subject files might be alphabetized while correspondence files are in chronological order. Level 5 is the item level. There are many, many more individual items than there are containers, and they are the most specific piece of a collection. You generally do not arrange at the item level, but sometimes you will. Small collections of important letters or photographs, for example, might be better served by an item level arrangement. Let me leave you with one caveat as we move from these 5 levels of arrangement. No arrangement is perfect, and different archivists will arrange the same collection differently. Sometimes even the same archivist might arrange a collection differently than that person did previously because they've learned more about archivy or they've learned more about the collection itself. This is fine. You should strive to arrange in a way that items, containers, series, and collections reflect provenance and original order as much as possible. Where you must impose order or make judgment calls outside of those 2 archival principles, arrange collection components for the greatest benefit you can for researchers and other users. Now, one of Holmes' most important ideas is that each of the arrangement levels can be described with the same fields. That is, each of the fields you see here applies to every level. The descriptive fields are creator's name and collection title, date span and extent, some kind of biographical, historical, organizational, or administrative sketch, and a scope and content note. Each collection has a name, a date span, an extent, an organizational sketch, and a note about its contents. In fact, archivists devised these fields to write finding aids for collections. What Holmes realized was that the fields applied to the repository, the collection, the series, the container, and the item, and that if you arrange according to those 5 levels and describe each of the levels with these fields, then you will have a very thoroughly described collection. So how do we put this knowledge to work when we impose arrangement during processing? This is the craft knowledge, the hands-on knowledge that an archivist must have. After thinking through arrangement of a single collection at the series level, put the files in the boxes. Consider the in-box arrangement of files to be tentative at first. Write the titles and the date span on the files, but leave off the file level identification number until later. Consider your arrangement. Does the file placement reflect the series? Are the files in correct order? For example, are alphabetical files actually in alphabetical order? When you're happy with how you've arranged the files, then put the number on the file. When you type your inventory, do not handwrite an inventory looking at the boxes and then type up the inventory from your handwritten notes. Type the inventory directly from the files in the box. Now, if you are working with another archivist, then they may have their own mechanisms for applying arrangement during processing. Follow what they ask you to do. But if you're left on your own devices, these are some pretty good pointers to prevent you from wasting a bunch of your time or for having to do inventories a second or even a third time and having to do a bunch of erasing on files. This then is the end of the lecture, and as always, I thank you for your attention.